Bob here, Chopper Bob Customs. Hey, Happy New Year! We're starting off this new year by putting CalTracs traction bars, Calvert Racing CalTracs traction bars on Martin's 57 Chevy. So stay tuned and follow along. Okay, so we've got the car supported on jack stands on the frame so that the rear end can go up and down. We've got it dropped down almost all the way to where the shocks are extended fully. It probably is down to where the shocks are extended fully. So the first thing we need to do is take the shocks off, which is just simply a matter of firing up the old impact gun. All right, now I'll need to get in the trunk. This has still got the shocks bolted to the trunk floor. It has been damaged. It's got a plate in there. I talked to Martin about it. He decided he wanted to continue using the trunk floor to mount the shocks. They do make a bar assembly that mounts to the frame, so the tops of the shock mount to the frame. I'd recommend it, but at any rate, here we go. I'm going to get up in the trunk and undo that top mount. So there we can see the repair that was done. Apparently, the thickness of this plate plus the thickness of the plate that's up on the top side made it so that there was no room for the rubber bushing on the top side because there wasn't one, and the bottom one was smashed pretty well flat. So, of course, we won't be reusing those. We won't be reusing the shock extensions because they are fine thread. The replacements that Martin bought were fine thread, and the Calvert Racing shocks have coarse threads. So instead of waiting on some very expensive coarse thread shock extensions to come, we're going to go ahead and use a coupling nut and some all thread to make our own shock extensions. The reason we're using shock extensions is Martin's got shackles on the back of this, and it's probably sitting up about 4 or 5 inches higher than normal. So you need some shock extensions so that the shock is not riding at full extension all the time. You want to have travel on the shock absorber up and down. So to that end, we're running some shock extensions on there. We will be reusing this lower mount. As I found out on the other side, this is sort of a unique piece in that it is not one piece as the ones that I'm used to finding are. At any rate, so next thing we need to do is take the leaf spring out of the car, and we'll start by pulling the nuts off of the bottom plate. Okay, we'll reuse the nuts, but we will not reuse this bottom plate. So that gets off the side. The nuts get set here close by, so we'll be able to get to them. And now what I need to do is remove I like removing the front one first, just because, I don't know, it's just personal preference. But basically there's a 1/2-inch bolt that is accessible from the inside through a hole in the frame rail that comes through and has a nut on the outside holding the front eye of the leaf spring in place. Let me position the camera here and get around there and get that undone. And okay, I'm going to have to take the fuel line assembly loose and see if I can get it out of the road enough to get in here, because it is blocking the path. Make sure that there's no way. Yeah. Okay, with the fuel line mounting bracket and the fuel lines out of the way, we can undo this bolt. Okay, so with that done, we'll turn our attention to the rear shackle and we'll take the bolt out of it. All right, now this particular spring eye has some urethane bushings in it, and it's got these spacers, so you don't want to lose them. So I'll put them real safe with the bolt. Slide it in there for now, along with the nut and the washer, and that'll keep them up out of the way. Now, the next thing I got to do is go over to the press, because that front bushing in the spring right there has to be removed. So I'll resituate the camera and be right back. Okay, so I'm set up over here at the press. Or I was set up over here at the press until it fell out of place. And what I've got is I've got a 36mm deep socket that I have that is big enough to grab the spring eye, but it also is large enough on the ID that it'll allow the bushing to drop down into it when I push it out. And then on the top I've got a 3/4 inch socket, and it is the right size to grab the outside, the sleeve, because you got to make sure that you press the sleeve out. And if memory serves, it'll probably get stuck. I'll have to pound it out, but I probably... we will not be using that anymore. Now let me see if I can get my socket out. I'm going to go ahead and pause this until I get to the next step. Okay, so this is what's going to go in place of that bushing. And what it is a sleeve that when it's bolted in is rigid on the frame, and then it has this machined tube basically that can spin freely on it. And this is how the CalTracs works. So for the time being, I'm going to set this aside. Now I know from experience that pressing this in can sometimes distort it, and so I'm hoping that I can avoid that by I have a good coating of grease on the inside of the spring eye, and I'm going to be putting a good coating of grease on the OD of the insert. Okay, so there it is installed, and now for the moment of truth, we'll see if that inner piece still fits into it. And if not, I have a way of taking care of that. It would be nice to have a 7/8 inch ream. I don't have that, but I do have a 7/8 drill bit. So let's see what happens when I try and insert it. And it did swage down on me. Not as bad as I've had them do it before, but it is swage. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take 7/8 inch drill bit and very carefully, you got to kind of ease into it. This is where a 7/8 ream would probably be a better way to go, but you got to work with what you got. So anyway, I'm going to pause this, and when I come back, it'll be assembled, ready to go. Okay, so with a little bit of work, got that bushing so that it slides right in there. It doesn't have too much clearance, and I think we're good there. So now, what we need to do, they do supply grease, and I tried to use half and half on the other side and half on this side. And this is the grease that they recommend using on this. Just a nice even coat. Because of the tight fit, you'll probably lose quite a bit of it, but see how my bench pressing skills are. It's not a lot of weight, but I'm an old man. So let's see how this goes. Okay, the hex goes towards the front of the car. It has got the right-hand threads. And at the back is a left-handed thread. I'm running them in all the way, but I do know that I will have to back it out. But this way, I'll know that they'll have at least the same amount of thread engaged, or at least the maximum thread engaged for each one. Okay, so with that like that, I'm going to go ahead and loosen it about probably 4 or 5 turns while I'm holding this one so it cannot turn. I do that because you'll need to have some clearance with this nut back here in order to get the rear bracket put on. So, and that looks about right. So we'll let that down like that. I'll come back and torque these nuts off camera. Okay, so this is the new CalTracs bracket. And like I said, we reused the old nuts. We make sure that the spring perch is located have to do just a little bit of fiddling with the jack. Okay, through the magic of YouTube, I've managed to get the locating bolt in the spring into the hole in the spring perch on the rear end. I'd tell you how I did it, but then I'd have to kill you. And so now I've got the CalTracs bottom plate on, and I'm going to begin by snugging up the nuts. What I like to do is I like to run them up till they're about the same place and then continue tightening it. That way you don't pull the U-bolt out of shape. So what I'll do is I'll run them up until I can just touch the U-bolt at the bottom of the nut. Okay, and I'll come back with a torque wrench and torque those down. I'll torque the front bolt down, and then I'm going to wait on the back shackle bolts until I get it set down on the ground. The front bolt tightens up that inner sleeve, but it still allows this to move freely. But on the back with those urethane bushings, if you tighten them up with the rear end drop down, you put them in a bind when the rear end comes up and it's trying to twist that bushing. So I'll go ahead and wait until it's on the ground to tighten those back ones up. So now the next thing that I need to do is get the shock taken care of, and I'm going to show you what I had to do on the shocks to get them on in just a second. Now, because this rear end has got those shackles on the back, the shock travel has changed to where if you did not have extensions on the shock absorbers, the rear end, well, you might not be able to get the shocks on because the shocks would be too short and you wouldn't be able to jack the rear end up enough to get the shocks in place. This car had extensions on it to begin with. Martin got some replacements. The problem with the replacements is that most shocks are fine thread, and these Calvert racing shocks are coarse thread. And so what we've done is we've gotten a coupling nut and a 4-inch piece of all thread cut to length, and I've got it lock nutted in place so it can't go anywhere. and this will get the shock hopefully down in the operating range that it's supposed to be in. So with that said, what I'm going to do, and then this is the side that had the damage from the floor getting busted out by the shocks, and I did do a little bit of cleanup on these so that the bushing would fit in there correctly. And I think with what I've got here sticking out of it, I'll be able to get a nut on and get them tightened up when I put them in there. The other side, it didn't have that problem, but this side obviously has that problem. I am positioning this so that the adjusting knob is pointing in towards the car, so you'll be able to get to it. I suppose if Martin wants him pointing out, he can flip the shock around. That's not a big deal. But let's see if I can get this puppy in. Okay. Okay, if I'm going to get this to work, I think what I'm going to have to do is make the stud about a 1/2 inch. I think I'll probably go 3/4 of an inch. Probably a 1/2 inch, because it's going to be poking through the carpet as it is. Anyway, I'm trying to keep it from dropping down. I'm using these plastic clamps. They've got a lot of pressure, but they're non-marring. So I didn't want to damage the shaft of the shock. And between the floor and the other plate and the rubber and the washer, I just cannot get the nut on there. So I'm going to go ahead and make a replacement for this that's a 1/2 inch longer, and I'll be right back. All right, I crawled in the trunk and got the top tightened up. I may need some final adjustment there, but now we'll go ahead and get the bottom shock mount tightened up. And then now the lower bracket is a little bit wide, and so when you tighten it down, we will need to compress it. It is a lock nut. The thing is, once you get the ball of the heim joint tightened in there, it's still going to be able to move around that ball. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and torque everything down, get the car down on the ground, and then once I get the car down on the ground, I will tighten up the shackle bolts, and then I'll go ahead and adjust the CalTracs. So that'll probably be tomorrow, but for you, I'll be right back. Okay, off camera, I went ahead and got the car sitting down on the ground, jumped up and down on it to get it to settle, and then tightened these bolts back here so that they are working on the bushing. but they're basically, since it's set with the bolt loose and then the bolts tightened up, you won't have it under any stress when it's just sitting here. So you don't want it under stress all the time. And then I had the approximate weight of the driver in the driver's seat, and I lengthened this bar by turning it until this pin right here just touched the spring. Did that on both sides, and then once I had this pin sitting on the springs on both sides, I went ahead and lengthened this bar 2 more flats of the bar by turning it and then locking the lock nuts. And that's your baseline preset for the CalTracs. And then, of course, you'd go out to the track and see how the car responds, both on how it leaves as far as twisting right to left, and then also lifting the front end or losing traction on the rear wheels. So, but that will be for Martin to do at the track. So with that, we've got the rear suspension all done up and it's ready to go. I did torque the lug nuts down on the wheels. I will tell him that since they're aluminum mags, they probably ought to be checked every 50 to 100 miles for the first several hundred miles. But beyond that, I think it's about ready to go home. So for now, Chopper Bob out.